very good evening and a warm welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us this Sunday evening. I'm going to start our show tonight by reading something that will set the pace for what our conversation is going to be about. In a democratic state, police and other law enforcement agencies wield power by the consent of the population. The citizens realize the need for law enforcement and that force is sometimes necessary. However, the actions of law enforcement have to be seen as one, proportionate to any threat, not arbitrary, two, applied impartially. When excessive force is used and if force is applied disproportionately, the public loses trust in the law enforcement. This is one sign of a breakdown of public institutions. Journalists are especially critical because they're the eyes and ears of the citizens. They are a check on arbitrary use of power. Tonight we speak to Sarah Birete over there, who is from Center for Constitutional Governance. Sarah, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Josephine, and good evening, viewers.
We also speak to Robert Sempala from Human Rights Network for Journalists. Robert, thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Josephine, for having me.
All right, and joining us online is Peter Mwesige from the African Center for Media Excellence. Peter, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Josephine. Good evening, viewers.
All right, I will very quickly point out that I'm not having representation from law enforcement for this particular episode on our panel is not for lack of trying. We did reach out, but the officers we reached out to were unable to be present today. So my first question to my panelists, what were you thinking today, yesterday, tomorrow, when you see these pictures of people that are being carried and rushed to hospital with blood flowing from them? What are you thinking? I will start with you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Josephine. The nature of the campaigns and the election we are going for in 2 months is very troubling, is unique, is very violent, and is very fraudulent. It is unfortunate that we have a justice of appeal presiding over such a kind of election. We have had more than 35 designated rallies of candidates blocked by police. We have had opposition candidates like Amuliat of FDC tear-gassed
even today
41 times on the official campaign rallies. We have had bloodshed, and main casualties are journalists, as if it's a crime for journalists to practice their profession. Yet campaigns are based on information, on freedom of association, on freedom of expression, and an environment that enables a voter to make an informed choice of who should govern them. So it's very unfortunate. The whole election is upside down.
Do you have any fears when you see the pictures that we've been seeing on social media the last couple of weeks?
You know, the violence is very troubling. After the 18th, 19th bloodshed on Kampala streets in November, we called for suspension of campaigns as civil society. But even before that, we called for postponement of this election in June, July, because of the nature and character, you know, the guidelines for COVID, the whole security enforcement, politicizing COVID. Yet, on another unfortunate note, a lot of NRM leaders have succumbed to COVID. I think more than 10 senior leaders of NRM. Very, very unfortunate. And whoever is politicizing COVID should be embarrassed, should be ashamed, and the hands of these NRM people dying of COVID is on their hands.
Thank you, sir. Robert, I'll come to you. If law enforcement targets journalists, which is, what it is believed to be, why should the public trust law enforcement?
To begin with, I think the police and the security forces have won by not appearing on this show, because what else were they going to tell us as a justification for what has happened today? And you rightly put it as a question, why must the public trust the security forces who are descending on the very people that are supposed to safeguard during an electoral process, and then injuring them? At the worst case scenario, seeing them lying lifeless on the floor, on the ground. And the justification is because they were in the wrong places, because they chanted songs for their candidates. I think the public has every reason to be very scared, to be very worried, to be at the presidency or in the presence of the security forces. Because we have seen many die, we've seen many lost their hands, their legs. So it's been a whole lot of anarchy since the elections began. But the most disturbing part is now when they descend on journalists. Because given the nature of the elections that we are having as a country, scientific elections, you'd think that the most precious asset of this campaign are the journalists. And so they would be jealously guarded from any harm. But look here, they are deliberately targeted. And then there is no accountability in this regard. So that scares us a lot. And not only journalists, because it would be extremely selfish to only talk about ourselves, but generally the public, people who go to cheer up their candidates must be extremely scared.
Peter, linking to what Robert's just explained, when we see the attacks now turned to journalists, the public is definitely going to start thinking that they're attacking them to hide something. Is that thinking, should this be a thinking that we should carry on with? Peter, can you hear me? All right, I will wait for Peter to join us. Sarah, what do you think?
You know, if anybody goes to court to challenge this election, it will not stand. It will not stand. It has been fraudulent from day one. It will not stand as an election. It can't. So whatever electoral commission is presiding over, and to make matters worse, you know, suspending campaigns in the 12th.
Sarah, we're going to get to that. But my question to you, when we see the attacks now aimed at journalists, people are going to think there's something they're hiding. Are we justified to think that way?
No, even before, you know, the attacks are not just physical, Josephine. You look at the calls for accreditation. The Media Council, which is not fully constituted, I think it has 6. Out of there would be 14.
It has 8, but to represent Niju that does not.
Okay, it has 8.
Yes.
Out of 14 members, is the media represented?
The most crucial posts are vacant.
Yes.
For the senior journalists.
Yes, so it's not fully constituted. Secondly, its mandate is to accredit foreign journalists and foreign freelance journalists. Article 29, one of the Press Freedoms Act is very clear. Where they get the audacity to summon journalists, Ugandan journalists, to be accredited is madness. And I hope journalists are defying that illegal order, and they can take further steps like seeking redress in court. So that is the first nature of harassment.
Just to respond to that, I know that will happen tomorrow, but yes, carry on.
The second nature of harassment is opposition leaders who are stopped from appearing on particular media talk shows, even paid up talk shows. Opposition candidates are blocked. Bobi Wine, I think and NUP members have been the most victims. Amuliat was switched off air. He spoke 25 minutes not knowing the radio was switched off. You know, this is the kind of media environment that we have in the country. So to make matters worse, the physical harassment, and we need to note, Josephine, that the only media who are brutalized are those covering opposition. I don't think any journalist covering President Museveni has been brutalized. So it is targeted brutality against opposition to block up messages of opposition and information from reaching the people.
Somebody will say that he's not breaking, the particular candidate is not breaking any of the rules. That is why there is
what laws are journalists breaking?
Yeah. All right, do we have Peter on the line yet? Peter, can you hear me? Peter, can you hear me?
What laws are journalists breaking?
All right, while we try to get to Peter.
Josephine,
yes.
Just quickly, there are journalists who have complained when working in the NRM camp. For say, one took a picture of a campaign when it was beyond the time, And of course, there were reprisals for taking such. During the 2016 elections, we saw some judges being thrown out from declining to use footage provided by security and the presidential team. So they only have complained because they have not done what the candidate wants. But the rest, this side, they're deliberately targeted by the security. The others are protected, and that is, for me, double standards.
Can we get Peter? Are we able to get Peter? All right, thank you for that, Robert. Peter, I wanted us to speak, before we move away from a lot of these things, I wanted us to speak about an editor in the newsroom, an assignments editor, who has to send a journalist out now to follow a particular presidential candidate whom they know that when you follow that candidate, there's a lot of heat, enough heat that would cost you an arm, a leg, perhaps, you know, whatever. What measures should they put in place? I mean, journalists are trying to do their jobs for this country, but at what cost? What is the editor supposed to think? How do they make that decision on assignments? What kind of protection do they give to their journalists as they send them out? Peter, can you hear me?
Yes, Josephine, I have heard you. It's a tough one, and I don't know if it had to come to this really, because I mean, elections are supposed to be, you know, one way in which citizens express themselves by selecting those they want to govern them, you know, and journalists are supposed to be the main avenues through which people get informed, through accurate information about, you know, what's going on and who to vote for and all that. This is the only way journalists, I mean, people are able to participate in their governance by getting accurate information from the media and by acting on it. So when these journalists are the targets of police, security, and others, it is sad. It is, you know, a tragedy for this country, and it doesn't augur well, I think, for stability and peace, unfortunately. Now, if I were in the newsroom, first of all, dead journalists don't tell stories. So we must, as much as possible, encourage these young and old people who are in the media to ensure that their safety comes first, you know. They should, as much as possible, try and steer clear of some of this fracas. Obviously, it is unavoidable, I mean, in the circumstances that they are operating in, because I've seen so many times police firing tear gas, you know, indiscriminately at crowds that include journalists, you know. So it's going to be a very difficult one. But I guess there is not much that the media and journalists can do if the police continue, you know, acting without reason, you know, acting brazenly like they have done so far in the last several weeks. I think that the onus really, for the most part, is on the police to try and understand that the media, journalists, are doing a service to the nation. An attack on them is not just an attack on the media, it is an attack on citizens, you know. In any case, you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, the president, perhaps grudgingly, conferred the status of, you know, essential service to the media, to journalists, because journalism matters, the media matter. So really, it's a duty of the police to protect all citizens, but in particular, to protect those young men and women who are putting their lives on the line to bring us accurate information about what's going on.
All right, Peter, I saw the statement that ACME released, the African Center for Media Excellence, and there's a particular line where you say, the increasingly brazen and arbitrary clampdown on independent journalism and civic space in the run-up to the general elections is a cause of serious concern. But again, thinking of, you know, the rest of the statement and the comments that I've been seeing coming in from the social media platforms, some people feel that journalists are getting, you know, asking for a special kind of treatment. Other people have also been affected by all of this. And I'd like to hear your response to that as well, journalist duty in this period.
Yes, you know, sometimes when we talk about the rights of journalists, the right of media, people think we are conferring some kind of special status indeed, you know, but our constitution is very clear about those rights. And to my mind, obviously, they are not just rights for journalists. The right to free expression is a right to all citizens. The only issue is that those within the media, people like you, Josephine, and others, in the newspapers, on radio, are the ones who, for the most part, are in a position to bring us information that we need to be self-governing. That is why you need protection. That's why journalists need protection. Obviously, there is no society in which the right to free expression is absolute. I mean, you can have some limitations, and we are all concerned about, some of the, excesses of some of the online platforms that are out there. But you cannot use that as an excuse to clamp down on, a whole group of people. There are so many avenues through which we can address some of these excesses. Misinformation, fake news can be addressed without resorting to violence against journalists or against those who work for the media. If we must limit freedom of expression, our constitution is very clear. It says, ultimately, that limitations must be acceptable and demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society. And I'm saying this because I've seen, I think most recently from the foreign minister, Sam Kutesa, when he was responding to, I think, the US government, he was basically saying that the right to freedom of expression can be limited in the event that it is prejudicing the rights of others or the public interest. Very often, people in our government deliberately ignore the last clause of Section 43 of our Constitution, which says public interest shall not include, limitations which are not acceptable or demonstrably justifiable. So really, it's not asking for a special status for the media. The thing is, they are critical, they are important, they are all we have to be self-governing, if you think about it.
All right, thank you, Peter. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. And we're speaking about navigating the difficult times of an election. We're speaking about the journalists earlier and also speaking about the police, and we will come back to the police. But I wanted to find out from all of you the role of the other political actors in all of this. We surely cannot blame, one group of people. The regulations that have been put in place maybe to protect all of us, not maybe, but to protect all of us. And some of them have floated these SOPs. So I want to hear from you, where do we hold other political actors accountable? Sorry.
I want to use the example of other countries that have held elections during COVID. South Korea, Zambia, Malawi, and a few others. South Korea is, I think, the perfect example of how they managed rallies, disinfecting communities, making sure the health personnel were the ones in charge of administering soaps at public rallies, making sure there is water for washing, making sure everybody has a mask, and to note that these governments provided their citizens with the masks. We know the fraud that has happened with COVID funds.
Did you get a mask?
No. And I don't know any of my family members, any of my people I work with at Center for Constitutional Governance who has received a mask. Nobody. So these countries provided masks for their citizens. It is easier to ask people to wear masks when they have them. We have a lot of poverty in the countryside. Even people in the urban centers are struggling. But they just sacrifice because they have saved lives. But there are people in the countryside who are looking for 600 shillings to buy salt. You cannot tell them to go and buy a mask of at least, I think the minimum is 3,000. When they cannot afford salt or soap in their homes.
So are we saying the people to hold accountable is the government?
No, it starts. There is a proportionate responsibility on other actors. So the government failed to provide citizens with masks. And we need to note that they have embezzled a big chunk of COVID funds. Unfortunately, money meant to save lives during the pandemic has been misused by this government. Away from that, we have the Electoral Commission, which was not sure on where the responsibility should fall when it comes to observing SOPs. You tell a candidate, ensure people observe SOPs. How is a candidate going to ensure that there are 200 people at a venue, that everybody has worn a mask, that everybody has washed hands? How does a candidate ensure that, for heaven's sake? So we failed to place responsibility at the beginning of campaigns, and we failed to benchmark from other countries that had successfully held elections while observing SOPs. And as civil society, we gave this information to Electoral Commission. So it is not the lack of information, but it is the disorganization in the management of elections. Then when it comes to the candidates, we all know that campaigns are emotional, campaigns are people to people. If I were a candidate, I don't know how I would say 1, 2, 3, 200 people, the rest to go away. I don't even know how that is supposed to work, for heaven's sake. So we failed the test of a special election during a pandemic.
All right, Robert?
For me, I think it was even very wrong from the onset for us to have allowed elections during such a very tricky situation. I think I agreed with the president initially when he said it would be utter madness when if you hold elections when there is still COVID. And I don't know what happened to the president later in due course and said we must have our elections.
Robert, the mask, you should be pulling it up, not pulling it down.
It's extremely covered. That aside, I think the Electoral Commission, like Salah hinted on, did not appropriately apportion responsibilities. The enforcement entirely lies in the hands of the security guys, the police. You see, most of them do not even have these masks when they're enforcing the SOPs. They arrest people using their bare hands, no gloves. I don't know what happened to gloves. Initially, they were giving out gloves to these men and women in uniform. Today, they just come and handcuff you with their bare hands, and then the next thing you see them eating their chapatis and everything else. So there is for me a gap in there. The other one are the politicians, because the first set of elections that we had were the party primaries for the NRM, and you would see people hugging each other, lining up behind each other, and you know it was extremely a mix-up for them. And no wonder, like Salah says, most of them are now really dying at a terrific speed. The senior guards in the party. It goes back to that. And now we also come to the wananchi, the individuals. They also have a lot to suffer, because you see them walking with their masks in their pockets until they come across a checkpoint. That's when they pull them up and then make them chin warmers instead of putting them on their nose and mouth. So there's a lot that has to be done in this particular incidents. But for me, I also want to see government injecting all this money. Salah says it was swindled. I don't know
Which
where
money?
it is. Money that is supposed to, that we all contributed, but also now a test for COVID is extremely unaffordable for common, ordinary people. Even now, if you must isolate yourself from your home, many people have single rooms, 2-room houses. How are you going to even isolate from your family, your wife? So you end up having a whole family contaminated with this disease. For me, we would have a place that is big enough. Nambole was the best idea for me.
I don't think we have.
The fact that you allow people get this and stay in their homes doesn't make any little sense.
I don't think we have the capacity to do it. And I think we've seen in other countries them do the same
but
thing.
Josephine,
we have to take the responsibility at some point,
people
really.
think that this is so easy. If I can even stay home with my COVID, and then I'm with my children, they come, Daddy, Mommy, how are you? And they go away. So the risk must really be heightened for me, for people to see it, to feel it. Not this thing of being in Ichikubo, people are so mixed up in markets.
Robert, I think we're asking too much from everybody. But again, when you say the responsibility of individuals, I think that's where that comes in. But Peter, I would like to hear from you on the responsibility of other political actors and also the public.
Thank you, Josephine. There is no doubt in my mind that, you know, the other political actors could have done better in terms of passing on a very strong message about the danger of COVID-19. I think they all have a responsibility to, at the very beginning of their rallies, to mention to the wananchi who turn up, for these meetings that COVID-19 is real and we should all take the necessary precautions. But having said that, it is quite obvious that COVID-19 has replaced the Public Order Management Act. These regulations of COVID-19 have replaced other regulations that have been used in the past to silence the opposition, to stifle their rights to associate, their rights to freedom of expression. I can't, we all know the context. For so many years, the opposition has not been allowed to hold meetings, even after all these laws were passed allowing multi-party democracy, in Uganda. That for very many, 3 years or so, Bobby Wine has not been allowed to hold meetings in very many parts of the country, including consultations. You know what happened in Arua when, in 2018, when his driver, Kauma, and others, he was shot dead, others were injured, and all that. So really, COVID-19 is real. We should all play our part, citizens and those responsibility alike. But I don't think it should be used as an excuse to stifle the rights of the opposition to actually participate in this election. Once we agreed that we're going to have an election, once we agreed that we are going to actually go beyond the scientific election, which Justice Gyabakama had talked about in the beginning, we should have known what we are looking for, what we are looking at really. You remember the numbers were supposed to be 70, then they were increased without any scientific basis to my knowledge to 200, and we are where we are because of those in authority taking decisions that are arbitrary and quite frankly contradictory. So in my view, yes, we all have a role to play in ensuring that these numbers are down. But we should also speak out when we see this pandemic being used as an excuse to, stifle the rights of other political players.
Talking about other political players, so I would like you to take this next question. If the perception is that the police is seen to be in the bag for one side, why would the opposition cooperate with them at all? Doesn't this place us into a cycle of violent encounters between police and the citizens? And in that case, shouldn't the police bear some of the blame for having started it in some way?
No, obviously, the manner in which the police has enforced the COVID-19 guidelines leaves a lot to be desired, and I think they have brought this unto themselves. Very many people look at the police and security as partisan precisely because they are behaved in a way that says exactly that. I'll tell you what, Josephine, I was over the weekend, at some resort, not very far from where I am now. And, the people who were allowed in there at the beach, which I actually had to keep away from, for my own safety, were not probably more than some of the people we have seen at some presidential candidates' rallies. Wow. And guess what? That nonsense was going on in a place which has nearly a battalion of UPDF, So when these guys, want to do the right thing, they can and always do. But right now, this is clearly a political thing. This has not, as far as I'm concerned, this has very, very little to do with COVID-19. And I think the police, their behavior in this, I don't know, it's going to take a long, long time for them to, come clean when it comes to how citizens view them. They are obviously partisan. They have the blood of ordinary people in their hands. Shame.
Wow. We're going to take a short break from shame, and we'll be right back. With us, we're going to rush through this one because we've run out of time. But just to get back into, we're speaking about police, and I want to talk about the promised investigations. This is not the first time we've seen somebody die or people get hit or something like that. But have you seen people brought to book? And I guess I want to ask, where is the accountability? And when Peter was speaking earlier and speaking about police and public trust, I think this is something that goes hand in hand. So where is accountability? Sarah?
Well, the police that is sanctioning impunity cannot investigate themselves and cannot punish themselves. We have also seen attempts at public interest litigation using the Human Rights Enforcement Act, but the state hijacks the cases. There's a case in Imbale involving the security chiefs that blocked Bobi Wine. The case was, it disappeared in thin air. So I think we need to accept that we have reached a level where as a nation, we cannot check impunity within our state systems. And I know that when we mention sanctions, people get worried. But this country has reached a level where it is in sanctions on individuals, on departments, on particular government agencies, even on government that are going to check the excesses of this regime.
Robert, I don't want you to answer that same one. I think Sarah said it clearly. But how do you rate the police public relations response to these crises? Every time something like this happens, we would expect, an explanation. You'd expect that, something would come out that would perhaps, give us some calm. And, how do you rate how they've done so far?
I think they're performing, they're trying to press all buttons. They're not pressing any right button under the circumstances. The mysterious absence of the IGP and the deputy in this and leaving everything to the spokesperson. Spokesperson is so common now that everything is going to say Mr. Nanga. It's even very predictable. And no wonder one of those days somebody just came up with a video which was saying so many things that are very uncoordinated, meaning that we don't even seem to understand what it is that he says telling us. For me, I would expect the police to come out at some point to give us these reports to say, there was an incident that happened in Aluka or in Jinja, and here is a report for you. We've investigated, either we've cleared ABC of our men.
But they do put out statements. There's a statement already out on today's.
Yes, I've read the statement, and it's very empty for me. It's extremely empty, promising to investigate. That's why I was telling you that now they are so predictable. You certainly know that this has happened. The IGP, the spokesperson is going to come out and say ABCD. I think they should really be up to the game and at least introduce a new face to say the IGP now, this is a very serious situation where 3 journalists are bedridden because they're covering one single candidate and in the line of duty. One is shot at, another one is struggling for his life. Another one,
tear gas canister on the thigh.
Leg, so you'd think that it would be the IGP or the deputy, or somebody there about
to show the seriousness of the situation.
To show the seriousness of this matter.
Peter, how serious, how critical is the public relations response in diffusing tensions and ensuring smoother public interactions?
It is a big deal. It is, it's very important. And unfortunately, but I think I understand where these guys who work in that department are coming from. They are in a very tough situation. I mean, defining the indefensible is quite frankly difficult. They all know, I know deep down in their hearts that what police is doing, is wrong. They know that shooting unarmed journalists and civilians is wrong. How are you going to defend that? I've noticed that in most of their statements, they rarely condemn, even if it was just a preliminary kind of step, they rarely condemn their officers who opened fire on unarmed people, but they are very quick to condemn others, to condemn political actors, to condemn, the citizens who turn up at some of these rallies. So I think they are in a very difficult situation. And ultimately, the responsibility is on the IGP, his deputy, and their appointing authority. They are the people who should be speaking very firmly on why this nonsense must stop and stop now.
All right. I had one of you, I don't remember who exactly, who spoke about the changing times we're in and social media. And I think we all now realize that the impunity of yesteryear is much harder to sustain. Social media is, has made it easier for everybody to document whatever is happening. And so anyone with a smartphone can easily record and publish police interactions with the population. Some recordings, of course, may be misleading because they're put out without context, and that can be very dangerous. However, I think that the best antidote is not less but more information and more professionalism on the part of the police, but also the media, that they should be able to trust because they can actually hold us accountable. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, Sarah.
Yes, bottom line beyond the media and police is upholding principles of rule of law, where every person is accountable, everybody is equal before the law, and everybody is answerable. Because we have excessive impunity within police and the army, especially the army that is involved in elections, because it's not only police. We see army men all over campaign rallies. So this impunity within the security agencies, it's because of the collapse of rule of law. The impunity of shooting that we saw on Kampala streets, including the CID officers that were in plain clothes, and the police failed to own up. Those are their staff, CID officers from several stations that were shooting in plain clothes. Total lack of accountability, total collapse of the police as an institution. I was glad when the new Deputy IGP said that he's going to secure the people. But he could not, even his statement could not outlive the event that we saw today in Masaka. Has he secured the people? So I think you need to call him on one of these talk shows.
How, Robert, and as we close, I think I'll pose this question to all of you so it can be your closing response. How should journalists navigate the times ahead? We have, what, 2-3 weeks to the election?
Yes.
How do they, because it's going to be dangerous, journalists, the population at large, everybody.
Yeah. For me, it's even too much to ask for journalists to take care of themselves at the hands of security that is out to target them. However, we should not labor in vain. Journalists should be very careful when going out to the field. Keep at least a sizable distance from harm's way. You never know where it is because men are standing around you, and they have like earmarked every journalist who covers with, the opponents. And this is not a general problem for the rest of the candidates. Katumba is not complaining, and Nancy and the rest. So it is Bobi Wine and FDC Power who are complaining. I think we need journalists alive to tell a story. We have already said it, that the only hero is one who is coming back and placing their fighting armories down, not the one who is putting them on their backs. Meaning you have to go, fight your war, and come back and tell that story. And that should be walked. That talk should be walked. It's not enough only to say, no story is worth your life. And then once you get into in the field, sometimes you see some reckless journalists where you think that a few things have to be done. And the responsibility square lies with the editors who assign these journalists. Know how a journalist is positioned for which stories and keep them in check. Or else even devote some budgets for security.
But you've asked us, and I'll cut you short there, you've asked us to give them helmets, we've given them helmets. You've asked us to give them, you know, we've given them. But so if they aim for that thigh, how are they going to do their work? Sarah, quickly, closing remarks, 1 minute. How should we all navigate the times ahead?
One, on COVID, let's all ensure that we observe the SOPs. We must be alive in order to enjoy a democratic Uganda. For the police and the Electoral Commission, the world is watching, and nobody is above the law.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you very much, Robin. Peter, please close us off. How should we navigate the times ahead?
I'll speak about the media because that's really what I know about. And I mean, I hope that journalists don't get carried away by the anger of the moment, that they will continue covering the election, you know, accurately as much as possible, that they will obviously protect themselves more and take precautions, you know, wherever possible, and that they will continue offering citizens context, the kind of context they need to understand what is really going on and to make informed political decisions come January 14th, January 20th, and so on and so forth. It's a tough call, but hope we can do that.
I've had quite a number of people saying, you know, if we should take the journalists out of the field because we can't protect them in those spaces. Is that something that they should be doing? We've seen the NUP party now say we're going to halt campaigns because journalists have been wounded. Is this something that's feasible? Peter?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think, I mean, it would be irresponsible. I don't want to use the president's words of madness about holding the election, but I think it would be irresponsible for media houses to send journalists to the slaughter. I mean, if it is clear that what happened today is going to continue happening, then, you know, we must cover these elections. I mean, the media should cover these elections from a safe distance. I don't think that, the message is still going to be very clear. Whether you are 5 meters from Kyagulanyi or 10 meters from Kyagulanyi, if he has been stopped from campaigning, if he's being tear gas, if he's being shot at, it is going to be clear. And those who care about these issues are going to get the message, right, you know, whichever way. So I think that, yeah, we should take precautions, all of us in the industry, you know, the media houses, those of us in media support, to ensure that these guys, the journalists, you know, secure themselves really.
All right. Thank you very much, Peter. And in closing, we'll just to say that we need a professional police force for social stability. We applaud their efforts in many respects. However, these events show that despite their promises, a lot has not changed. We hope that they will see the need to explain their actions to the public truthfully, and we hope that they will still value public trust, and we hope that they will investigate and prosecute criminal actions within the force regarding these incidents. Otherwise, any democratic progress that our country has achieved is being progressively eroded before our very eyes. Thank you very much, all of you, for watching. Coming up, details of today's tragic events and other stories on NTV.